In the Black Ridge Caves, barely 12 miles from the Old City, there are 4 skulls that have never been officially cataloged by mainstream archaeology. It isn't due to a lack of interest. It was a deliberate choice. Since 1967, following the Great Border Conflict when the state took control of the region, excavations in the specific caves where these skulls were found were halted. They were never resumed under open academic supervision. The question isn't whether the skulls exist. They do. The question is, what are their measurements? What do those measurements imply? And why has access to them become a gray zone between archaeology, politics, and theology? If the answer were simple, if these were just larger human skulls within the normal range of variation, there would be no reason for the silence. And yet, the silence persists. Today, we are going to follow the trail of evidence, from what the Salt Basin manuscripts actually say about the sons of God and giants, to the cranial measurements that leaked in unofficial reports, and finally, to the stated and unstated reasons for the ban on excavations. By the end, you will understand why this story connects Genesis 6, the Book of Enoch, and a political decision that has kept independent archaeologists away from these caves for over 50 years. Join the investigation. If you're looking for investigations that go beneath the surface, that treat evidence with gravity and respect both tradition and science, subscribe now. This channel is for those who refuse to accept ready-made answers. Hitting the subscribe button takes 3 seconds and ensures you won't miss a single piece of this puzzle. What you will learn. By the end of this video, you will know the actual dimensions of these skulls and how they compare to modern and ancient sapiens. What the hidden manuscripts found in those same caves say about a lineage of pre-flood giants, and why these passages are treated as marginal text by the mainstream. The exact timeline of the excavation ban, who made the call, and what official sources admit versus what internal sources report. 3 questions will guide this investigation. First, are the skulls anatomically human, or do they possess features that defy standard classification? Second, if the texts from the Ridge speak of Nephilim as historical entities rather than mere allegories, why does conventional archaeology ignore that reading? Third, what exactly happened in 1967 that turned the Black Ridge into a controlled zone, and who has access today to the artifacts that are hidden from public view? The silent fragments. The Black Ridge is world-renowned for the Salt Basin manuscripts discovered between 1947 and 1956. Hundreds of texts, some biblical, some apocryphal, others completely unknown until then. But the official narrative, an isolated community of scribes, pious men who copied and preserved sacred texts. But among these scrolls are fragments that don't fit that clean story. Fragment 4Q531, for instance, part of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic, describes the Nephilim not as a moral metaphor, but as a genetic lineage. It speaks of their height, their disproportionate strength, and their origin as hybrids between sons of God and daughters of men. It mentions proper names, kingdoms, and destruction. The community that preserved this text treated it as history, not a parable. This creates our first point of friction. If the inhabitants of the Ridge considered Enoch relevant historical literature, why does modern archaeology treat these same fragments as mere theological curiosities? The evidence in the dark. The 4 skulls were found in a side chamber of Cave 4, the same cave that produced the largest cache of manuscripts. They were discovered in 1952 during excavations led by Robert Vance, a prominent archaeologist. Preliminary reports from that era, still accessible in the archives of the National Museum, mention skeletal remains of unusual dimensions, but offer no elaboration. Vance died in 1971 without publishing a full analysis of the bone findings. What we know comes from 2 parallel sources. First, field photographs that were never officially published but circulated among academics in the 1980s. Second, reports from physical anthropologists who had brief access to the skulls before the post-1967 reorganization. One of these reports, signed by an Israeli forensic pathologist named Nick Haas, describes one of the skulls with a cranial capacity estimated at 1/800 cubic centimeters. For reference, the modern male sapiens averages between 1/200 and 1/400. Neanderthals reached 1/500 to 1/600. The skull Haas measured, if accurate, surpasses both. This doesn't automatically prove pathological gigantism, but it demands an explanation, and no official explanation has ever been published. Data versus interpretation. Now, before we move forward, we must clearly separate verifiable data from interpretation. Fact: 4 skulls exist at the Black Ridge, mentioned in 1952 field reports. Fact: at least one was measured and recorded with a cranial capacity well above the sapiens standard. Interpretation of: A. This indicates an unknown or poorly documented human lineage, possibly related to the giants mentioned in ancient texts. Interpretation B. This is a rare but natural anatomical variation within the sapiens spectrum, possibly a pathological condition like pituitary gigantism, and the lack of publication is due to academic disinterest or lost documentation. Interpretation? C. The skulls are normal humans, and the unusual measurements were recording errors or secondhand exaggerations. Orthodox archaeology leans towards C or B, but they haven't published a definitive osteological analysis. Why? The bureaucracy of silence. The conventional answer is bureaucracy and priority. The Black Ridge yielded thousands of parchment fragments. The skulls, just 4 among dozens of other bones, were not a priority. Limited resources were funneled into preserving and translating the manuscripts. It's a plausible explanation, but it leaves questions. If the skulls were truly unremarkable, why did Nick Haas, a respected forensic expert, take the time to measure them and record the anomaly? If they were remarkable, why was his report never incorporated into the official publications? And why, after 1967, when the state reorganized control of the archaeological sites, was access to the specific caves where these skulls were found restricted? 1967. The turning point 1967 is the key year. Before then, the Black Ridge was under international oversight with excavations coordinated by various consortia. After the Great Border Conflict, the National Antiquities Authority took over management. The official decision: a halt to excavations in several caves for heritage preservation and damage prevention. The unofficial decision: according to reports from archaeologists working in the region, certain caves were reclassified as security zones or sensitive areas, with access requiring military, not just archaeological, permission. Why the distinction? The official line cites proximity to border patrol areas, but the ridge is miles from the actual border, and other ruins much closer remained accessible. The alternative explanation: the artifacts found in certain caves had implications that went beyond archaeology, touching on theological interpretation and the politics of identity. The roots of the legend. Let's look at the texts. Genesis 6:4 is the root passage. There were Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Hebrew word Nephilim is hotly contested. It may derive from naphal, to fall, suggesting fallen ones. It could be the proper name of an ethnic group. The Septuagint, the 3rd century BC Greek translation, uses giants. Jerome's Latin Vulgate keeps giants. However, the original text doesn't specify height. It specifies mixed origins and fame. So why the tradition of giants? One possibility: an oral tradition predating the written Genesis preserved memories of men of massive stature, and Nephilim was the label for that memory. Another: the giants translation is a later interpretation, influenced by Greek and Mesopotamian myths of heroes and demigods of exaggerated proportions. The Book of the Watchers. The Book of Enoch, an apocryphal text preserved at the Black Ridge, goes further. Enoch 6-7 names the Watchers, 200 angels who descended upon Mount Hermon, swore an alliance, and took human wives. From this union, the Nephilim were born, described as giants of 3,000 cubits. 3,000 cubits would be roughly 500 feet, biologically impossible. This sounds like literary hyperbole, a way to communicate enormous beyond measure. But Enoch also says these giants consumed all the acquisitions of men, and began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, suggesting predatory behavior and a transgression of the natural order. Enoch treats them as historical agents, not moral archetypes, and Enoch was preserved at the Ridge in multiple copies, suggesting the community highly valued it. Allegory versus history. The orthodoxy responds: Enoch is apocalyptic literature. It uses symbolic language. The Watchers represent rebellious angels. The Nephilim represent pre-flood moral corruption. There is no intent to claim the physical existence of 4 Zerorus with 0-foot hybrids. This reading is solid, but it creates a tension. If Enoch is just allegory, why did the inhabitants of the Ridge, a group rigorous and literal in their interpretation of the law, preserve Enoch alongside historical and legal texts? And why was Fragment 4Q531, which lists proper names of Nephilim and their actions, written with the same documentary sobriety as the community's legal records? The third way: distorted memory. There is a third, middle reading. Enoch might be preserving a distorted cultural memory. At some point in the Neolithic or Bronze Age, perhaps there was a human population significantly taller than the regional average. This population interacted with, and possibly dominated, smaller groups. The memory of this encounter was passed down orally, gathering mythological elements, angelic origins, exaggerated height, while keeping a factual core. There were men who were much larger, they were different, and they vanished. Enoch would then be the attempt to give theological meaning to that memory. This doesn't prove anything, but it makes the Black Ridge skulls much more relevant. If there is a memory of giants, and there are skulls of abnormal dimensions in the same region, the connection needs to be investigated, not ignored. The anatomy of an anomaly, back to the skulls. Besides the one measured by Haas, there is mention of 3 others. One, according to field photos, shows a pronounced sagittal crest, a feature associated with massive muscle attachment, common in great apes but rare in sapiens. A human sagittal crest appears occasionally in cases of acromegaly or gigantism, endocrine conditions that cause disproportionate bone growth. If the ridged skull shows a sagittal crest, there are 2 options: an individual with pathological gigantism, or an individual from a population where this trait was more common. Pathological gigantism is rare and usually accompanied by other bone deformities. If all 4 skulls show increased dimensions but proportionately normal anatomy, the evidence shifts away from individual pathology and toward population variation. Institutional caution. Yet, we have no published analysis, no DNA, no officially released carbon-14 dating. What we have are fragmented reports, unofficial photos, and institutional silence. The silence isn't necessarily a conspiracy. It might simply be disinterest. Biblical archaeology is a minefield. Any find that seems to confirm a biblical narrative becomes a weapon in theological disputes. Academic institutions avoid publishing data that could be used dishonestly by creationists or biblical literalists. Thus, ambiguous data is buried, not out of malice, but out of caution. It's understandable, but it has a cost. The truth becomes inaccessible. A global pattern? In the 19th and 20th centuries, there were multiple reports of excavations in the Near East and the Mediterranean finding skeletons of unusual size. Most were debunked or reclassified, but some cases resist. In 1950, excavations in a necropolis in Gath, an ancient Philistine city, revealed male skeletons with an estimated height between 6'7" and 7'2". Goliath, according to 1 Samuel 17, was from Gath and stood 6 cubits in a span, somewhere between 9'6" and 10'6". Obviously, no 10-foot skeleton was found, but 7'2", while rare, is biologically plausible. It marks Gath as a place where very tall men were more common. This could be cultural selection, valuing tall warriors, or a genetically distinct population. The vanishing evidence. Take another case, the Lovelock Cave in Nevada. Early 20th century reports spoke of human bones belonging to individuals between 7 and 8 feet tall. Local legends spoke of red-haired giants. Those bones disappeared or were reclassified. No modern analysis is available. A pattern emerges. Reports of large skeletons appear, generate interest, then vanish or are debunked without solid public analysis. Explanation A. They were frauds or exaggerations. Explanation B. The science of the time was amateur and unreliable. Explanation C. There was and is institutional pressure, not to validate narratives that appear supernatural or biblical. The Book of Giants. The Salt Basin manuscripts include several texts mentioning giants. Beyond Enoch, there is the Book of Giants, 4Q531. It's fragmentary but clear. It narrates the Nephilim as individuals with names like Ohia and Hahia, who have prophetic dreams about their own destruction in the flood. The text treats them as conscious agents, not symbols. There's also Jubilees, another text found at the ridge, which describes the Nephilim as men of renown who taught women sorcery and men war. This sounds like the memory of a dominant elite, technologically or militarily superior, who were mythologized as semi-divine. Selective access. If we piece these fragments together, we get a picture. The ridge texts preserve a tradition of a distinct human lineage with size and capacity above the norm that existed before a catastrophic event and disappeared. Since 1967, requests from independent archaeologists to excavate or analyze the artifacts from the specific caves where the skulls were found have been denied or redirected. The official justification varies. Site preservation, lack of resources, special permits required. But there are reports of archaeologists gaining easy access to other caves at the ridge while being barred specifically from caves 4 and 11, where the most sensitive manuscripts and the skulls were found. This suggests the restriction isn't general, it's selective, and selectivity implies a criterion. The DNA gap. The orthodox counter-argument: if this population existed and was so distinct, where's the DNA? We have genomic sequences for Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo erectus. If there was a sapiens population of massive stature, we should find genetic markers. Possible answer, because no one is looking. Ancient DNA studies focus on known populations. Giant bones, if treated as anomalies or frauds, don't enter the protocol for genetic analysis. What we need is a targeted study. Take the skulls from the Black Ridge, Gath, and Herman, extract the DNA, sequence it, and compare it. This hasn't been done publicly. It might have been done in private, with results withheld. or it simply hasn't been done at all. Final thoughts. Science should resolve uncertainty, not perpetuate it. When scientific institutions treat evidence as controlled property rather than public knowledge, uncertainty becomes a weapon for infinite speculation. The Black Ridge holds secrets. Some have been revealed, others remain in sealed caves and restricted archives and unpublished reports. The question is, for how much longer? What do you believe? Are these skulls a genuine anomaly or a misunderstanding buried by time? Let me know in the comments. In our next episode, we will investigate another blind spot, the tunnels beneath the temple site, what truly exists down there, and why the authorities have agreed to keep excavations strictly forbidden. Until then,